Welcome back, folks. Today's episode is with an interview with Ian Mitchell, who by any standards is, well, he's a super smart guy to begin with, but he's been described as a number of things, including a brilliant researcher, an inventor, and by some people as a mad scientist. I don't really buy into the whole mad thing. I mean, personally, I think he's just one of the most, well, he's one of the smartest and one of the most curious people I've ever come across. And I think that when you put really smart together with really curious, you get really, really good things starts to happen. And we see this with Ian for sure. Ian is a research scientist by trade, but his breadth of knowledge and the problems that the puzzles, as he calls them, that he's been able to solve go everything from developing groundbreaking supplements for humans right through to developing concrete that sequesters carbon. And, you know, he says, oh, but nobody's ever going to use that. And I'm like, well, why? I mean, I think we need to be running around with that to all governments and saying, here's part of the solution, right? But anyway, that'll be another podcast. In today's podcast, we talk about carbon 60. We talk about Neural Rx because carbon 60 is the backbone, if you will, of this amazing brain supplement, which is about optimizing the brain, improving BDNF. And he's actually had some really great success, even with people who've had some significant issues. As for people like us who are looking to optimize and improve our capacity, if you will, our baseline is already reasonably good. I find that I work really well when I'm using Neural Rx during the day. And I also really love using a supplement where benefits will build over time. And this is one of those supplements, and we talk about it in the podcast. So let me not waste your time here and just leave you with our classic disclaimer, which is, of course, we're not treating, diagnosing. Everything in this podcast is really just about information, great information. So before you run out and buy anything or try anything new, make sure that you've checked with your doctor or your medical provider. Make sure it's not going to interfere with anything else that you might already be using. Beyond that, if you get value from this podcast, you know the drill. Please share it out. Leave us a review. Those reviews are so important to get us up the rankings. And if you have any comments or questions or anything at all, and you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Facebook in the Optimizing Superhuman Performance group. Or if you're not a Facebook person, I have a holding group on MeWe called Biohacking Superhuman Performance. I'm not there that often, but it's definitely there. But for sure, make sure that you go to my website, which is natniddam.com, and you can join my email list there. I'm not emailing anything about anybody about anything these days. I am going to start a newsletter in the next little while. I've also got a lot of things coming down the pipes. I've got a couple of courses. I'm working on a bunch of different projects. So if you want to stay up to date with what's going on with me, then for sure, go to natniddam.com, send me your email. And if you have any comments or questions, that's the way to send them. And I love comments and questions. I love when people reach out to me. All of the communication I get from you guys is really what keeps me going and tells me what you like and what you don't like and all that kind of stuff. If you're looking for me on Instagram, Natalie Niddam. If you're looking at me on YouTube, I will post this. If you're listening to this, I also post the videos on YouTube, just my name, Natalie Niddam. And that's it. That's all I've got for you guys. Oh, how do you get Neural Rx? Right. You go to WizardSciences.com because, of course, what else would you call this company? WizardSciences.com. And you can get 10% off if you use promo code BIONAT10. So BIO, NAT, N-A-T, 10. All right. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you guys. And let me know what you think of the episode when you're done with it. Hey, folks, before we launch into the episode, we have a sponsor, and our sponsor today is drinkhrw.com. And this company is all about the magic of molecular hydrogen. They make the most incredible molecular hydrogen products. So they make these tablets that you can easily just drop into your glass of water every single morning as you start your day, which is exactly how I start my day. I start my day with 2 tablets of molecular hydrogen, this stuff, in water with a squeeze of lemon, and that's what I take my supplements with. So why do I do that? I do this because molecular hydrogen is this amazing foundation supplement that I include in mine and pretty much every protocol that I write for my clients. And I got to tell you, there's not a lot of things that I include for everybody, because I do believe that everybody needs different stuff. Everybody has different needs. But when it comes to molecular hydrogen, when we talk about a supplement that can help to manage inflammation, reduce inflammation, it helps to reduce pain in many cases. It helps to balance blood sugar, right? So improve insulin sensitivity. And when you hit even just those two markers, we are talking about already upgrading your body's ability to function really well during the day. Also really good for energy, really good for recovery for athletes. It's a pretty amazing substance, especially when we think of the fact that molecular hydrogen as a molecule is the tiniest molecule. It's the first molecule on the periodic table, but it's because it's so tiny that it is able to get in where it needs to in the cell and initiate all of these incredible processes. Drink HRW also has tablets that you can drop into your bathtub so that you can soak your whole body in it, get the benefits for your skin, get the benefits systemically into your body. So your skin is your largest organ of absorption, guys. So this is a great way to get your molecular hydrogen. It's also really great for people who've got aches and pains and who are sore. It helps to mitigate all of that inflammation. So what are some of the other reasons why you might want to drink molecular hydrogen? Well, as travel is starting to come back, is making a comeback, then I drink molecular hydrogen on my flight. I start 30 minutes before the flight and I take it every 90 minutes while I'm flying, because when we're way up in the sky like that, we are actually exposed to radiation, and molecular hydrogen has been shown to be helpful at mitigating the negative effects of that radiation on our bodies. So ultimately, supplementing with molecular hydrogen is all about aging well. It's about longevity, and it's about managing your body system so that you can look, feel, and perform your best. And this supplement, molecular hydrogen, delivers on these points like nothing else. And one of the things I forgot to mention is that molecular hydrogen actually combats oxidative stress. And it's not just anti-inflammatory, it's selective selective antioxidant. Plus, it also helps to support a healthy inflammatory response. So you guys, obviously, I can keep talking about this for a really long time. What I'm going to invite you to do is visit the drinkhrw.com/superhuman website and check out the research for yourself. If you're one of those people that needs to see it for yourself, that needs to dig into the research, I will tell you that this website, this company's website, is a wealth of information, and it's not just about them. It's just about all of the clinical trials, clinical studies, all of the research you could imagine on pretty much any topic you can imagine around molecular hydrogen to help you to make your own decision about whether or not this is right for you. Like I said, I personally recommend it to all of my clients. I use it myself every single day. But for some of you guys, and for many of you guys, we should always be informed. These guys have one of the best repositories of information on this compound out there. So drinkhrw.com/superhuman. And if you use promo code longevity10, you will save 10% on your purchase, anything that you buy, and you can use that promo code over and over and over again. So thank you so much for staying with me through this, and enjoy the episode. Hey folks, just a little bit of housekeeping before we launch into the episode. Please remember that all of the information provided in these podcasts is for information purposes only. We are never offering treatments, cures, whatever, for any kind of disease or medical condition. Anything you hear about here is going to be intriguing. There's some research around it, but make sure that you check with your medical provider before you go off and do any of this stuff for yourself. All right. So enjoy the episode. And also, if you're looking to connect with me for any reason, with your comments, questions, whatever it may be, you can reach me through my website, which is natniddam.com, or you can find me on Facebook in the Optimizing Superhuman Performance group, or on MeWe in the Biohacking Superhuman Performance group. And of course, you can also follow me on Instagram, which is at Natalie Niddam. Natalie is with an H between the T and the A, the second A. So thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you guys. Enjoy the episode. Good afternoon, Ian Mitchell. It is so good to see you again.
Likewise, glad to be here.
Yeah, well, we recorded this once before, only we were having connection problems. So I decided we were going to have to re-record. And then you said, well, it works out just fine because I have more stuff to talk about.
the never-ending stream of development and R&D. Yeah.
I know. And, this is the reason why guests like Ian Mitchell, you end up bringing back, because it's not like you create something and then just sit there. You've always, I don't know how many projects you have on the go at any given minute, but I'm sure it's several.
Yeah, it's actually the thing that kind of keeps me engaged is it's sort of my core passion about, it really helping, right? That's it. And whatever variety that takes on, whatever flavor it is, but I get to play with things in physics and quantum physics and chemistry, biochemistry, material science. It's great. Like the biggies right now are, I've got my WizardSciences stuff, which is kind of neural upregulation. Then I've got on the physical side, I've got Biocharged, which is ozonated oils. Then I have a carbon negative concrete. That's pretty fantastic.
Which is not a biohacking tool, by the way. It's biohacking
I use
for the
it
planet.
To weight myself in a pool.
Yeah. It's biohacking for the planet, which the planet sorely needs at the moment.
Yeah, and then propulsion systems. Actually, I've got some gamma shielding and ionic drive systems because personally, I think strapping yourself to a giant bottle rocket is a very silly, old school, Werner von Braun 100-plus-year-old tech sort of approach that I really don't think is terribly well thought through. So I figured I'd put my money where my mouth is and actually invest in developing a bunch of those technologies. So that's what I've been doing.
Okay, well, on that note, why don't you explain to the audience very quickly, because we're keeping this one short.
Sure.
But why don't we just give people like the super, super short, who is Ian Mitchell? And why is he doing things with concrete and then mixing stuff up for my brain and then making this oil that's going to clean out my bloodstream? And we're not even going to talk about the hair stuff today. So.
Yeah. So, So I studied chemistry. I studied music. Those were my actually legitimate academic pursuits. They sound kind of disparate, but to me, they were the same thing because basically it's sort of recombinant systems of frequencies.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
and
it totally makes sense.
And my approach to chemistry is a little different because, like Mendeleev's periodic table is a little wackadoo, if you ask me, because it's kind of like grouping things by color instead of grouping things by actual position and how they function. And it's close, but it gets off. The periodic table actually uses Walter Russell, was this guy around the turn of the last century who developed one, and it was spot on. And it's all about resonance and harmonics and how things interact tonally. And so,
that makes sense.
when you look at the two things, you're able to do a lot more with it if you fundamentally understand how it's going to interact. Not to say that, normal chemistry or biochemistry dealing with, ligand interaction, all that stuff, it happens, sure. But It's kind of, is it really the base of the causal structure, right? I always quote Thoreau, for every 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil, there's one hacking at the root. You want to be the cat hacking at the root of things, right?
Yeah.
Right? Figure out what's really going on and address it. And this is one of the approaches that you take, right? Like bioregulators.
Yeah.
And we've had this discussion offline, is I think they're incredibly impactful because they provide your body the signal to do what your body is supposed to do, right?
Yes.
And it goes all the way back down to, nucleotides and starts modulating expression epigenetically at the nucleotide level. And that's a big ass deal. I mean, that makes a dent. And a lot of the compounds like that I play with, are nanoscopic sorts of stuff like carbon-60. Those elicit a big response. Ozone gets a huge response because it's the third most reactive molecular species. So when I try and play with things that are going to actually provide enough leverage to do something. And all of the disparate things, when I opened my lab, I wrote down 6 things on the board, just kind of stream of consciousness, that my goal was, what can I do to leave this place better than it was when I showed up? And the 6 things that I wanted to knock out were aging, cancer, clean water, global warming, superluminal travel, and there's one other in there. I'm sure it'll pop up in my head, but they were
just little
things.
goals, guys, kind of like I'd like to grow marigolds in my garden this year. And also I'd like to learn how to cook rice.
Oh yeah. I read the other was energy systems, and they
go.
all, yeah. Well, interestingly, it was funny because it was kind of a stream of consciousness in that order. But as it turned out, when I started looking at aging and biological degradation, right, the thing that was the most impactful then led me to be able to figure out how to stop the metastatic spread of cancer, right? Which sounds like a big claim,
well, no,
but
yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's, you have to just fundamentally look at the systems, but one led to the other, which led to the next. And so I kind of had to unlock the puzzle sequentially. And so, who knew? Stream of consciousness seems to work. So that's me. I'm just a guy who's very overly curious, trying to solve lots of puzzles. And some of them, like the carbon negative concrete, that'll make a huge dent. Not that it's going to go, become something that's totally ubiquitous and everybody and their brother uses it. But if they did, overnight, it would eliminate 13 gigatons of CO2 in the atmosphere, literally annually.
Well, in one of my previous careers, I worked for an organization called Evergreen in Toronto, and they were all about livable cities.
Yeah.
And we hosted a conference once that was all about how technologically can we advance cities so to address these issues of climate change and whatnot. And I don't know if they talked about the concept of carbon neutral concrete, but they were talking about building highways with a concrete that would transfer energy that would power lights on the side of the road so that you wouldn't have to have light standards. These ideas of taking a building material that is ubiquitous on the planet and basically harnessing it somehow so that it is doing something kind of like a tree, right? A tree takes water, produces carbon dioxide or oxygen, takes carbon dioxide. So what you're doing is saying, okay, we're kind of running out of trees. Got a shit ton of concrete around. What can we do with concrete? Like, that's pretty freaking awesome. So I think everybody should be using carbon neutral concrete.
I do too, actually. Well, to be clear though, so when we first started working on it, the idea was neutral. And then I hit neutral really quickly, right? Because concrete production accounts for 8% of the global CO2 emissions. Neutral was very simple. It was just negating 8%. But then I thought, I suppose as one does sometimes, I thought, neutral was easy. How much can I push this thing? So without getting it out of cost parameters and without making it too terribly difficult to do, because the other thing is, if you end up with something that's a tremendously difficult process that works really well, you failed because the adoption rate is going to be so low that people won't do it and you won't have any impact. So with that particular thing, what I tried to do was set it up so that they can just ship out one component and replace it with a different type of mixture, and it does the entire process. So in the case of this stuff, it's you eliminate a great deal of the sand and you replace it with another component. And one, sand is running out, and two, the other component sequesters carbon in a much better way. So it ended up being a net negative of 24%. So it eliminates the 8 that's positive and then sucks out another 24.
That's 30%.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So you could eliminate almost
32.
a third. Yeah, you could eliminate almost a third of all the greenhouse gas emissions in a year just by producing all of the new structures that are produced out of carbon negative concrete. Wow. So it's impactful. Again, it's finding ways that are right there in front of us. The obvious thing that we can do that everybody's already doing that will move the needle. So that kind of gets back to the core of really how I'm trying to approach things is, we've got a finite amount of time. And actually longevity, I think, was the first thing, because personally, there are a lot of things I want to help with, but I think it's going to take a while to figure all of them out. So the first obstacle was longevity. If I can put time on my own clock, then I can start really working in earnest to try and solve some of these things before I keel over. And at the point at which I take it, as my dad always calls it, lovingly, the dirt nap. Hopefully I will have had a very.
I've never heard that. That is exceptionally great. Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's save the fact that he frequently calls me at this point because his health is failing a bit and goes, well, I'm getting close to the dirt nap, and he really, very much, just kind of looking at it very academically and very dryly. He just knows that his own mortality is impending. So he just, he tries to approach it with a bit of levity, I think. But
Lovely.
Yeah, it is. So for me, I put time on the clock by virtue of longevity. And the thing that that hit me the most right when I really started focusing on that as an issue was that carbon-60 study that you and I've talked about, the one that everybody calls the rat study, the Fatih Musa Bhatti study from Paris. And I basically recreated that in my lab. And a lot of people, often wonder, like, has anybody recreated the study?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so for people who don't know about the rat study, because there's always going to be a few people who don't, sure. Why don't you tell us, quickly, basically this was when they were doing the trials on the rats to find out, okay, we're putting this stuff out into the world. How toxic is it? How long will it take? And how much will it take to kill these rats so that we can come up with that LD50, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Then not only did the rats not succumb at any reasonable amount, they ended up living, what was it, like 90% longer? 90% they got tired of feeding the last rat, so they killed it.
But they wanted to publish, I think it's probably more than like, oh my God, we've got this great data. It'll put us on the map if we publish. Yeah, so they did. They sacrificed the last rat, which is, I think, a bit short-sighted, but, hey, whatever.
Yeah.
Still kind of an amazing result. I don't actually think it would have made it much past the 90% mark. And the reason I say that is when I did it, I redid the study, but I did it with P53 knockout mice. And so what I looked at was I tried to find the most short lifespan that I could to kind of do a really comparative analysis.
Right.
So P53
they used Worcester rats, right?
Yeah, they use Worcester rats, right? And so those will live 2.5 years. And if you double it, you got 5 years of rat time on your hands. So I wasn't really wanting to go down the very path of having that much rat time on my hands. So I opted for P53 knockouts, and because those are what people generally call cancer mice, or cancer rats. So in this case, I used P53 knockout mice, and so their lifespan, they have an incredibly well-defined mortality curve because so many people use them for oncology research. And what I found was the type I used were the homozygous. So it was the knockout, negative homozygous, which had the shortest lifespan. And they should have only lived about 6 months. Well, they ended up living 93% longer on average than they were supposed to. And what led me to item number 2 on my list was not only did they live 93% longer, P53 knockout that's your tumor suppressor, is the P53 gene.
Yeah.
So when you have a P53 knockout, there's no tumor suppression. So the reason you use them for oncology research is because they spontaneously develop tumors, right? So you get all this idiopathic tumor formation, which is, the fancy sciencey way of saying that the tumors just present randomly throughout the body of their own spontaneous origin. And so when you have no suppression, you just expect that they're going to present with tumors all over. And they're the ones that end up with bulbous growths, all over their body. And it's very kind of an unfortunate lot in life to be born as a cancer rat. But mine, they didn't end up with tumors. And it was very peculiar. So the first one that died, I opened it up and did a necropsy on it, and I couldn't find anything. It obviously died of a femoral hemorrhage. There was maybe what appeared to be a little mass of something, but very, very tiny. And I thought, I don't do this every day, so I'm going to send it off to a veterinary pathologist. So when the next rat in the cohort died, and then the next, and the next, and the next, I kept sending them off for vet pathology, and none of them came back with any conclusive masses. And it was very odd to me that mice that were designed to have tumors didn't have any tumors. So that kind of led me down an entirely different avenue in looking at using the negation of some components of cellular biology as a trigger to knock out metastatic spread of cancer. And really, it's pretty fundamentally simple, because Johns Hopkins released a paper showing that the cancer uses interleukin-6 and interleukin-8 to promote metastasis. So it very brilliantly co-opts your own immune system to signal its spread. Who knew? Nature, give it time and it'll figure things out. And then another university in Spain simultaneously released a big paper showing that in order for cancer to propagate, the mitochondria can't be killed. They have to just be dysregulated. There's a very narrow bandwidth, which correlates with the Warburg effect, right? Because it's a glycolytic response. So you eliminate oxidative phosphorylation. So you're knocking out the next 34 units of ATP you get, and you're just basically stuck in 2 units of glycolysis, or 2 units of ATP from glycolysis. And so it was very similar, but the serum that I put together after seeing that knocks out both of those components. So it drops cytokine responses and then suppresses the ability of the stuff to spread, but it also upregulates ATP production in the mitochondria beyond the threshold where cancer can actually propagate. So,
Wow.
it's, yeah, pretty
So
handy.
I have a question. So did the mice get C60? So this was buckyballs fullerenes. So they were getting C60. Were they getting it for their whole life? Like, did you keep giving it to them their whole lives? Because that's another thing that people miss in that other trial is
that they only got it for a portion
the whole time. It was only part of their lives, right? So how long did you give them the carbon 60?
So I started 2 months in, so which would, be effectively probably for an average lifespan would have been akin to giving it to somebody at about 26 to 28.
Yeah.
So starting at that age. And then I did dose them for the remainder of their life. So I didn't, the body study, and that's BAATI for anyone who wants to look it up. In the body study, they didn't do that. They just gave it for a narrow window.
I think
and
it's
then
7 months or something.
Yeah, and then the effects, exactly. And then the effects continued throughout their lifespan. So I think what happened there, kind of looking at it retroactively, since I did one, they did one, and another group did one actually, but they found, and this was recent, they found that it promoted tumorigenesis, right? So they were getting tumor growth. But right now, the interesting thing about that, I personally think that they were perhaps a bit off in some of their methodology, because it's really easy to squirrel C60 if you have any sort of light exposure at the wrong frequencies, because as much as it's a very profound antioxidant, it's also a very profound oxidant, and it will pump out singlet oxygen like nobody's business if you hit it with the right frequency of light. So when you're prepping it, making it, if you don't have the right environment, it's very easy to pump out all sorts of negative stuff and crack the oils that you're binding it to, right? So if you fractionate the lipids just by virtue of breaking them into smaller chains, sometimes you end up with, lipid peroxidation byproducts that are really bad. Like it would be effectively like taking rancid oil,
Nice.
and ingesting that on a consistent basis. And I don't think that's a good approach. Incidentally, the same group that did that also tried to license my patents for cancer technology for the C60. So even though their results were seemingly detrimental and negative, they still seem to be somewhat interested. So
Interesting. And so that methodology isn't published, like where they got their C60 or how they produced it, because you can make your own, I guess, but
no, they actually, it's listed, and I've read the paper. It's listed in their materials and methods. So, I mean, they talk about how they did it, but again, it's all the things that you don't pay attention to that get you,
right.
What's your light exposure? I mean, if you really want to be a nerd about it, you can look at the frequency response. Do you make it in a space where you only have red lights? Do you make it in a space where, you're getting so many joules per, square centimeter of exposure to photons? Like you can really drill down and kind of nerd out about it. But once you know what you're doing, it's not that difficult, but the process of knowing what you're doing takes a little while.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's not a tremendous amount of available literature on it. So it really is kind of, you have to try and figure it out. I'm lucky because I have, a great lab with access to pretty much every spectroscopic and analytic tool you could want.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could do this stuff and test it and say, oh, well, this is out of spec. This is out of parameters. We cracked this. We didn't crack that. And a lot of it, sometimes I don't even drill down and do, HPLC. I'll just do quick stuff with UV Vis because I can do a really rapid analysis. And you can see if things are really greatly out of the parameters. And then once you've figured out kind of the ballpark of how to approach it, you drill down and then you do like a GCMS or HPLC analysis. And then you can see exactly what you're doing. But if you don't have access to really, great lab equipment, probably better off to just, buy your stuff from somebody.
I was going to say, buy it from someone who does.
Yeah, and there are a lot of good companies. There's my old company C60. There's SES Research. There's the guys at Purple Power. I mean, there are a whole lot of people that are producing just straight up C60. Granted, they all do it in different lipids, but I know that those people know that they actually know the process and know what they're doing, and I've seen how they do it. So I would, if I were dealing with C60, I would buy it from the guys who actually do it.
No, that sounds
consistently.
Good. All right. So seeing as we're talking about C60, why don't we start with our comment? Because we were going to talk about two things today. We're going to talk about Biocharged, and we're going to talk about Neural Rx, which is one of the WizardSciences newer products, I think. Is it newer?
Yeah, it's the only product I've released. So it's
wait. You released Biocharged? No?
Yeah, I did, but through a separate company altogether. So
I see.
Yeah, so you'd actually go to biocharge.co to find the Biocharge stuff, and WizardSciences.com to find that. And they're two different approaches. So both handle oxidation, some in a proactive sense and some in a reactive sense. So the Neural Rx, basically the idea there is I use C60 as a backbone mixed with caprylic acid, so the C8 fraction of an MCT, just because brain octane oil basically. So it's very, very potent. And the reason for that was I wanted something that would fractionate into ketones and carry the other components where I wanted them in the body, because that's kind of the nifty thing with C60 is it's a great molecule, but you really have to look at what lipid are you binding it to, because your body processes different lipids different ways, right? Certain fats get utilized in different areas of your body. So in that case, I wanted something that would take effect neurally. So I bound everything to C8 because I know I can get it fractionated in the liver and then transport up to the brain and drop a lot of C60 there. But it's also got NMN, CoQ10, PQQ, resveratrol, serapeptase, right? And all of those were for very specific reasons. What I was shooting for is I was looking for something that would upregulate mitochondrial performance, stimulate new neurogenesis, which and it actually will outpace BDNF and NGF1 by a factor of like 2 to 3, or 2 to 3 to 1. So it's pretty handy because every day you pump out new neurons, but then your body does this synaptic pruning because neurons are incredibly energy dense. They're very consumptive of resources. So when your body senses something and says, oh God, I'm going to have to send so many resources to it, unless you actually need it, it prunes it and gets rid of it because it's less efficient. And it's always recalibrating every day to try and be more and more efficient. So actually, on the case of this, as a quick aside, when people start taking Neural Rx, what I always tell them is, in the second or third week, start learning something. Do juggling, or do dual in-back training, or learn a new language, learn a new instrument. Do slack lines. Do something that really pushes yourself cognitively, because when you're under cognitive load, those neurons will actually cement themselves into place, and you'll end up with more neuronal density, as opposed to your body just pruning them off for efficiency. So the other components, NMN and resveratrol in a 2-to-1 ratio always upregulates mitochondria, so you end up with higher ATP production on the back end. So you're upping the production side, and then C60 drops oxidative stress load, so you end up with actually more things moving through the chain. So it in and of itself upregulates ATP, but by virtue of negating loss. So what I wanted to do here was add one thing that pumps up the up cycle, add another thing that negates the down cycle, so you end up with a much greater ATP output in your mitochondria there.
So you're addressing the uptake in ROS basically from the reactive oxygen species. So the downside of producing more ATP is you're going to produce more reactive oxygen species, and so you're basically saying, okay, well, I don't want to leave you with all that on hand.
Right. So you mix it.
Yeah, you mix it.
So you balance that out. So it not only, does it take care of just the normal reactive oxygen species production that would be happening, it'll eliminate more. So as you upregulate the cycle and you have more load on it, you need something to counterbalance that. And then, CoQ10 to help, the same thing with the ETC, the electron transport chain. You just want to upregulate certain components in the cycle. And then PQQ, that was because I did an experiment to see how far I could push the output. And at a certain point, you end up popping the mitochondria, right? You get so much electron potentiation that they pop like popcorn.
That's not so good.
No, and that's not so good. So I obviously dropped that down. When you're figuring something out, I approach it sometimes where I try and discern what are the parameters, like where are the limits of this thing.
Right.
And so on the one end, you have, mitochondrial death, via too much electron potentiation, which is not a good thing.
No.
So I downregulated that, obviously. But then I thought, well, if you've got this huge uptick in potential energy by virtue of a supplement, then you can either have all these mitochondria kind of redlined at the peak capacity, or you can simply stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis. And once you have a lot of mitochondria, you upregulate the number of mitochondria, hence the PQQ.
Yeah.
Then you're spreading the load. It's kind of like, I always jokingly tell the guys in the lab that, it's like a Ford Fiesta. You can get it to 600 horsepower if, you put nitrous oxide, but it's going to blow the motor. Or you can just use a very nice Maybach V12 and completely distribute the load and, get the same horsepower. So I decided to kind of upregulate, keep the metaphor, to upregulate the cylinder count. So just by adding more mitochondria. And so it distributes the load, so you're not running at a red line all the time. And then the other component, serapeptase, goes in so that it can actually, it's a proteolytic enzyme. It's
so that was an interesting one. I'm curious about that.
Well, so when you start upregulating energy production in your brain, your brain has all sorts of byproducts that come off, and you need to clean the system. And the way you actually clean your brain is with the glymphatic system, right? So it triggers at night, and it uses cerebral spinal fluid and washes your brain, but it does it at night. So I wanted something that would break down the aggregate proteins and plaques that always form. We're constantly exposed to toxins and stresses,
sure.
And your brain reacts just like your fat around your midsection generally is, because people ingest too many things that change their pH balance. And so the body sequesters those things in fat, basically. And in your brain, it sequesters it in plaques and amyloid beta plaques and tau proteins, right? So when you're under load from some sort of stressor, environmental stressor. So knowing that those things are built up and starting to form aggregates and will start to impinge neural processes, I needed something that would bypass the blood-brain barrier and get in and start breaking down the actual plaque buildup and making it small enough components that it could get taken out in the glymphatic system when the glymphatic system is stimulated, because you now have all this new energy production going on.
Right.
And so it goes in, breaks the components down, and then during the night when you're sleeping, your glymphatic system is stimulated because you have more energy. There's less of an impediment there, and you start to flow out all of the toxin buildup. And so you're just fundamentally making things flow better. And then the last component was for areas where you have some sort of impediment because you have those aggregate plaques. The idea was to change how the neurons actually formed and to change the morphology. So normally, you've got your neuronal body at the center, and then you have a long span of the axon going out to the dendrite at the end.
Yeah.
Well, the morphology of the new neurons from this are different. And so their axonal span is 2 to 3 times longer than a normal neuron. So it's
and this is a good
it's
thing.
A little different. Yeah, it is, because I kind of think of it as a patch cord, because if you're trying to,
right,
you're trying to transmit a signal along electrochemically, right? So you've got either electrical or electrochemical transmission through the neurons. And the idea is kind of, I joke that it's kind of like those old patch cord operators, like Pennsylvania 352, where they just, they stab it in at one point.
In the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, that job that she has in the basement of the store. Yeah.
That's exactly it. Right. So that's kind of what it's doing. And so if you're trying to get a signal around and you can't get through, well, then, if you have these extra long neurons that have a long dendritic span or long axonal span, then you can get the signal through. And so that was kind of one of the little sort of special sauce things that I thought would be kind of interesting to do.
So it makes extra long neurons anywhere, or just when it's in an area that needs repair?
I don't know. I don't know yet. Okay. And that's one of the things that I'm kind of trying to figure out is, it's sort of hot off the presses, and I take it myself quite frequently, and I like it, and I'm constantly trying to learn new things because of that. One of which, the last one was kind of funny. It was wrapping, which is sort of
wrapping,
exactly,
as in not Christmas wrapping as in like that.
Wrapping as in, if hop on my Instagram page. It's at IanMitchell1. My daughter recorded this because she put it, she said, begrudgingly, I have to respect the drip, which is, I think, the new way of saying, It was very good, and I'm really upset that it was very good.
Oh my God. You were supposed to be getting embarrassed here, Dad, not showing me up.
Yeah. Well, the thing was, I realized that it was just something new, right? And so if you have to put your brain under cognitive load, you have to do new things. And so I thought,
Yeah.
well, verbal acuity at a really hastened pace would trigger that, because I've never done that. And it was surprisingly difficult. But at the end of the day, it was a new thing to learn. So
well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I know there's a peptide called Dihexa, which is supposed to do a lot of this. Well, I don't know about a lot of the similar things, but it's supposed to help with neurogenesis and create new neural pathways. But definitely when people talk about using Dihexa, it comes with a caveat of you need to learn something new.
Yeah.
The exact same thing, like either learn how to ballroom dance or learn a new language or learn a musical instrument, like something, which is interesting, because you could argue, regardless, as we age, we better keep learning new stuff, because if we want to keep this brain lubed and moving and functioning properly, right?
Yeah, neuroplastic as opposed to crystalline. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I've got this great diamond in my head. It doesn't work very well, but it looks good. But that's such an interesting concept. But anyway, we should be learning this stuff. But that these compounds now, like the Neural Rx, can actually help to, I'm guessing it's going to help to speed up the learning and cement the learning in a good way. But I have a question.
Seems to be the case.
But I have a question for you. So if you're learning a new language versus learning a new physical skill, so then it's the language center that's going to get the benefit, the biggest bang for the buck, versus your motor skills, for example. So maybe you want to do two things. Maybe you want to learn to speak a new language or play an instrument while you're learning a new physical skill.
Well, interestingly, your question, and I'll be completely brutally honest about it, I don't know the answer. However, I would say that the body being as brilliantly adaptive as it is, where it senses a load, it's going to utilize resources, right? Yeah. So it's always trying to reach some sort of beneficial homeostasis. And so my hunch is, and I could be wrong, and if I am, I'll let you know, but my hunch is that when you put yourself under a physical cognitive, or kind of a physical load that has a cognitive benefit, like trying to juggle or something like that, you're naturally going to stimulate that particular part of the cortices, and your body's going to respond by sending the stuff there where it potentially needs to have new neurons and new growth and more energy. I'm a firm believer that the body is more capable and adaptive than we can begin to scratch the surface on. That's why I like, bioregenerative peptides, is because you just give it the signal and kind of get out of the way and let it do its thing. Same thing with C60. You drop out a lot of the oxidative load, you give the body energy, and it does its job, right? There's not a whole lot of mystery to it.
Yeah. So I have another question for you. So a lot of the ingredients in this Neural Rx also, you could argue, might have a bit of an affinity for cardiac muscle.
One could argue that. Yeah. Yeah. And
one CoQ10, even the C8, right? I mean,
yeah. And I think really the affinity there, it's kind of like, and you could also argue the same thing for visual and ocular things.
Right.
And I think the reason for that actually has to do with a propensity for those areas to have a heightened mitochondrial density. Right. So it's not just that it correlates because, it's your heart. Your heart has 5,000 mitochondria per cell, followed by your brain, followed by your eyes in a guy. And in a woman, it's your ovaries, then your heart, then your brain, then your eyes. And
no kidding.
Order.
Yeah. I did not know that.
Yeah. Your ovaries are actually tremendously mitochondrially dense. I think it's 100,000 per cell, which is by far and away far more than any other component in our physiology.
And even after, does that stay true even after menopause, or do you think that's premenopause, or do you not know?
I think that's premenopausal. Yeah.
I would think so too, because the body's not going to direct that much energy to something it doesn't perceive it needs anymore.
Right. And having rolled quite a few people out of menopause by virtue of some of the supplements that I've made, which I thought was, as a guy, I thought, ooh, you're markedly de-aging. That's a great win. Surprisingly, I was met with a bit of disdain and reluctance.
Really? Because I think they are being very short-sighted. If we think about the downstream effects of menopause, like skin, brain, like all of these things start to go downhill. I don't know. You can send me some of that stuff. I'm down.
Yeah, okay. I will actually. Yeah. And it's again, I kind of felt bad. Like I was championing it like, oh, this is great. When they called and talked to me. Yeah. And literally every single time it happened, there was a bit of resistance. I was kind of surprised because I thought, well, this is perfect. This means we've actually rolled you back. The clock has rolled back. Woo! Go team.
And they're like, what? I have to deal with birth control again? No, I don't want birth control.
Yeah. Apparently there's some downsides to it, of which I was not terribly familiar. So, suppose you can't be all things to all people. And since I lacked that particular bit of the plumbing, I wasn't really keeping it at the forefront of my mind. So, yeah.
All right. Well, that's very interesting. Okay. So we're talking about Neural Rx. So how long has it been out, and how many people have you gifted with it? Like, I mean, how many people have used it? What have you seen? You yourself like it, which is awesome, but your brain's already going about 10 times the speed of anybody else's. So you don't count. Who else?
A lot of people just, surprisingly, so many people have looked at it. I think we've had, on a platform that I didn't really know much about, TikTok, which I thought was for dancing videos. Someone posted chronicled their experience using the Neural Rx on TikTok, and it's had, with all the videos they've done, it's had close to 1 million views, which was kind of surprising. Yeah. And I think so far about 1,000 people have taken it. And so far it's great. I mean, everybody has the same basic reaction. I've had a couple of people, I actually spoke to someone this week who said, I had heard about it from Molly Maloof, who's a doctor that runs the Psychedelic News Hour on Clubhouse. And Molly had taken it, and it worked exactly as it's supposed to. So she had recommended it to a couple of people and posted about it. And one of them said, oh, it didn't work for me. And so I called him because I'm always curious, like,
sure,
where was I amiss? Where did I go wrong here? So I called him and we spoke, and actually he hadn't shaken the product. So, and unless you resuspend the components, it's difficult. Well, that was the first part. And then the second part was his metabolic profile was a little different. And because of his accelerated metabolic rate, he just needed to up the amount a little bit.
Right.
And he was also, because of some other conditions, sort of suppressed on a cellular level systemically. So he really needed some other components, because you can't just address something like your brain and say, oh, I'm going to just address my brain. If the rest of your physiology is dying on the vine, your body's going to prioritize what needs it the most, rather than sending it to that first. So I've actually been looking towards physically fixing him up a little bit so he can actually get the experience. Because when I see somebody, it's I mean, I do all this stuff because I really genuinely want to help. And when I see somebody who's not getting the benefit, I want to know why. Is there something? Because sometimes you pick out the best bits of data from the outliers. If it hits because when it works incredibly well, why? When it doesn't work well, why? And as soon as you start to dial it in and you're able to assess that and then address it, then you can actually come up with something that's going to benefit a whole host of people. And admittedly, there are always outliers, right? So you look for those statistical anomalies, and they're always going to be there. But I just kind of figure, like, when I hear something like that and I can actually find the person, I find the person because I want to know.
Yeah. So, we're going to finish on this one because we're going to move on to our next topic because we don't have a huge amount of time today. But so when somebody starts taking the Neural Rx, typically, so again, it's going to vary from person to person, obviously, but how long before they might experience benefits, and what might they, and now again, like going back to the idea of to get the most benefit from it, you want to be learning something new so that you're giving your brain something to work for, kind of thing, and use all its new superpowers for. But typically, if I'm just Joe Blow and I'm going to start using Neural Rx, do I take it all the time, every day, indefinitely? Do I take it in waves? How long before I might feel some benefits? And what might I feel? Like someone with brain fog, for example, might it break through the fog and the frog?
Yeah. Yes, it will break through the brain fog. So it depends. Because it's in an MCT base, right? Caprylic acid, you have a pretty hefty gastric response if you're not used to taking it. If you're used to taking it and you can, do 2 teaspoons, you'll notice it immediately.
Well, see, it's
within
not
a
too
matter
bad,
of minutes. It's still, for people who have never done any MCTs, it's a little bit of a transition.
Really? Okay. So
Yeah.
start low, guys, build up.
Yeah. And so I always tell people, start with a teaspoon. So with a teaspoon, it usually takes a couple days. If they can do 2 teaspoons, they'll notice it instantly. If you do a tablespoon, it's like rocket fuel. And that's and it's literally just, I don't know, 30 minutes, maybe. Within the first couple of hours, your perspective is entirely different. But it's one of those things that you want it to cumulatively build up in your system. So over the span of the first few days, pretty much everyone notices a difference. I mean, it's, unless there's some sort of physical impediment to it, you'll feel it, and you'll feel it very quickly.
Nice.
So
love it.
Yeah, just roll on slow so that you don't overload your system.
Okay. And so is it a 7-day-a-week product? Do you think people should use it in waves?
No, I use it all the time, pretty much, because I like keeping a baseline. And also, environmental stressors are hitting your brain every day. So if you can do something to kind of just help your body negate that, you'll slow down the pace by which you're sort of falling off and degrading. And so that's why I'd recommend that one for everyday use. Also, there's a much lower concentration of, like C60 in it, just because you can't actually get that much to bind in caprylic acid. So the concentration's very low. So it's not going to have any, and that, actually, having looked at it for years now, it doesn't appear to have any detrimental impact. But just on the off chance that there were potentially a buildup, the buildup would be so incredibly slow that it really wouldn't matter. But I don't recommend people do a large dose of it with, what we jokingly call the wizard dose, which is a tablespoon, because 15 mils, unless you're really doing something that's academically or mentally rigorous that particular day, if you're trying to crunch through a term paper or you've got a final, knock yourself out. But otherwise, you don't need that much neural potentiation, because it upregulates the potentiation, just kind of like using a TDCS or something like that. And so you wouldn't want to do that on a consistent basis.
Okay, well, this is amazing. And we ended up talking about this a lot longer than I thought we were going to talk about it, which I should have known. I mean, frankly, I think we talked for about almost an hour before we even started recording.
Yeah.
We do have a chatty Cathy potentiating effect on each other.
Yes, we do.
So
yeah, and thank you for the tips on the peptides, by the way. That was epic. I will be using those today.
Any day, anytime. Okay, so here's what we're going to do, folks. You've got the goods on Neural Rx. You can get it at WizardSciences.com, and you can save 10% with promo code BIONAT10. And our other topics, which are equally fascinating, we are also going to talk about Biocharged, and we're going to answer a lot of the questions that people have asked me, because this product's been out for a little while and there have been a lot of questions about it. So we're going to answer those questions in the next episode. And we're also going to talk about Ian's other new product, which is mystery. Does it have a name?
Yeah, hair science system.
Yeah, hair science system, which not only will give you beautiful, glossy, amazing locks, but it's going to make it grow where maybe it stopped growing, sort of. So that's
how it works.
So that's what we got.
That's it. Yes.
Parting words, Ian, for the audience, or are we just cutting it off and you got to jump?
No, I love you guys. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, and thanks for being here, and thank you so much for being here today, Ian. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. And so perhaps the part 2, maybe live.
Yeah, so we're talking about doing a live episode at the Upgraded Labs conference in September. I think it's September 16th to 19th.
Yeah.
And we're both going to be there. So I think we're going to go live. We're going to go, I don't know, we're going to go outside somewhere and hang out. And
that's fantastic. Yeah.
and first we're going to chug some Neural Rx. So.
Yeah, and I will. I will partake of that every day. So I'm happy to do it. We can put it in champagne glasses and go to town.
Okay, this is sounding better and better, guys. Okay, thank you so
All
much.
right, cool beans.